Norse and Germanic. If the other world we have met tend toward cellar, road, or court, the Norse cosmos throws a cold, wind-cut road between them. The Helvega begins at the Pyre, or the wave. Valkyries and sea roads carry some away, and the dead end up in several distinct houses. Fólkvangr, Valhalla, or hell, according to fate, honor, and sometimes just plain luck. Gates and thresholds, Pyre, wave, and the long road to hell. Pyre, wave, and the long road to hell. Do the rides properly, and the road remembers you. Fail them, and you get a very awkward detour. In the north and west, the passage to the other side is not an abstract leap so much as a small series of very practical instructions. Burn, bury, send by hull or mount, name the dead, and hand them a travel kit that will not embarrass them at the gates. The Helvega, the road of the dead, is a route you launch with ritual labor. A pyre, or ship, a barrow, a cairn, and the words that set the spirit free to move. Cremation and shipwrights are departures staged as departures. A pyre is a gesture that turns the body into motion. Smoke and flame are the engine of a voyage, the clean, searing way to cut the tie and to let the spirit take the roads. Ship burial is the same logic translated into hull and tides, laid out on timber, set to sea or interred in a boat grave. The dead travel by water because the world edges are often watery, and because boats make excellent metaphors for uncommon departures. Either way, fire and hull are vehicles, work manlike, obvious, and surprisingly elegant when you are time poor and facing eternity. But not everyone is cremated. Inhumation and mounds, burials and ship tombs anchors the dead in place, but still mark the passage. A mound is a local doorway, a raised name point in the landscape that says, clearly and loudly, "We have accounted for this person." Grave goods are not sentimental clutter. They are suitcase items, tools, weapons, valued belongings. These are practical kit for the roads, a plate for a sticky situation, food for a long walk, a pendant to show you belong to a house or line. Leave useful things, not fussy ornaments or fussy ornamentation. The gods appreciate pragmatism. Naming and laments do much of the heavy ritual lifting. Funeral speeches, kenning and elegy are not only declarations for the living, they license the dead to go. To say a name aloud in the proper register is to release and to bind in one breath. Release the person into travel, bind them into memory. Laments tell the road who is coming and under what authority. The ritual speech instructs the spirit and the landscape about rank, kin, and obligation. Runic inscriptions, rune-carved markers, and namestones play the same role in durable form. Words made permanent, so the road's clothes will recognize the traveler centuries from now. Carve the right name, and you make a complaint that outlasts weather. Landscape limits are practical things, burrows on ridges, strand lines where holes were last seen, cliff ledges that look properly dramatic when the light hits them. These are local doors. People leave gifts at these thresholds, a stone turned, a strip of cloth, a tucked coin. Each gesture is a small bureaucratic act with the afterlife. The cairn becomes a postbox. The strand turns into a harbor master's office. The living bury messages in space so that the world seem will read them and behave accordingly. Meaning and metaphor sit cheek by jowl with ritual precision. Old sagas and orientations use formulaic phrases. The Helvega, the road to the land of shades, the wave roads, and these are not pretty prose tricks, but technical vocabulary. They name procedures. To speak in the right canon at the Pyre is to put the dead into the correct legal category of passage. Poetic epithets are therefore not mere ornaments, they are ritual tags that the road understands. Think of wit as paperwork, mildly entertaining and legally binding. There is also a social choreography. The funeral is a parade of obligations, kin to carry, elders to speak, craftsmen to carve, smiths to bend iron into tokens. It is a civic performance that organizes grief into visible labor. The mound or pyre marks who will be remembered, who will carry the name, and who is now a responsible party for offerings. Public mourning is not just cat houses, it is the community's way of updating the ledger of social claims so that the deceased's rights and debts are clear at the other ends. Grave goods and their selection make social sense. Weapons for those whose lives were told for tradespeople, tokens for allegiance for household heads. The kit is a catalogue of identity and a pragmatic provision. A finely made sword that a pirate says, this one expects to be capable. A well-packed football says, they will not starve on the roads. They living decide what counts as useful afterlife gear, and those choices reflect who the person was and what the community expects their passage to require. The shore and the mount also function as memory places. A stone set at a strand, a rune face at a barrow, a carved post by the road. These markers anchor oral speech into landscape and time. Future travelers will know how to speak of the dead because the place itself keeps the cue. Visiting the barrow becomes a civic duty, to set a new stone, to relay a wreath, to tell the child the name, and, in doing so, to keep the road registers current. Tone matters because rites must both comfort and instruct. The ceremony is practical and a little crumbly affectionate. Someone will make a joke about the dead's poor taste in tunics, while the elder names virtues that keep them useful in memory. There is room for tenderness and for a dry quip. Humor eases the route and reminds everyone that life continues to be lived out loud for those left behind. In the end, the Helvega is a travelogue of care, pyre, ship, mount, name and gifts, about fanciful accoutrements. They are the logistics of transition. Do the rites properly, burn if that is the route, lay in the boat if tide and custom demand it, carve the rune, speak the name, and hand over sensible kits. And you launch your soul with credentials and a map. The road will take note, the gates will open, and the dead will arrive where they are meant to be. Remembered, provisioned, and properly registered on the ledger of the long road to hell. Transit and Psychopomps, Valkyries, ferries, and the messengers of fate. If passage is a procedure, then in the north it is a remarkably specialized one. Some dead are hand-delivered by battle maidens, others are sent by tide or ferried across river bridges, and a few ride with walls or watchful birds. Transit here plans the martial, the domestic, and the poetically inevitable. An administration of afterlife logistics conducted with spears, song, and a very steady sense of destiny. Valkyries do the initial sorting. They are not merely pretty extras at the battlefield. They are choosers, Valkyriur, who move among the slain, marking those who are to be taken to Odin's halls. Think of them as selectors with very specific briefs. They pick those worthy of a warrior's afterlife, and then escort them, often depicted as riding through the dust of conflict with male-clad purpose. Their work is selective, ritualized, and crucially, recognized in the sagas as authoritative. Not everyone dies in the same service. Some are taken to Valhalla, while others received by Freyja in Fólkvangr. A reminder that the afterlife housing market has more than one manager. The Valkyrie is efficient. She chooses, she delivers, and she does not linger for small talk. The sea and the ship are equally essential to passage. Boats are not mere accessories to burial. They are vehicles of departure. The image of the dead placed on a longship, set aflame, or lowered into a graveboat is ritual cosmology, made manifest. Horus Ark, Master's Pole, Titus Roads. Ship burials and pyres perform the same function in different registers. They launch a person along the Helvega, or they make the body itself a token of motion. Archaeological finds remind us that this is not just poetic language. Timber, rivets, and grave goods turn metaphors into logistics. A well-sent boat announces that someone has been given credentials for a watery road. Do it well, and the tide will remember your name. Ferries and guides appear where rivers and bridges cross the nether thresholds. Norse lore contains bridge wardens and liminal figures, the Kjalarbo and its keepers. To watch the river Hjöl, who mark the seam between here and hell. Crossing is not always a free-for-all. They are checks, a kind of bureaucratic bridge tender, who watches for credentials, whether those credentials be a proper funeral, an inkin, or simply Urluk, the liaments of fates. Sometimes the guide is more administrative than heroic, a ferryman of sorts, a guardian of strand and ford who ensures that the dead follow the route prescribed by custom and destiny. Animals and familiars do the smaller but vital work. Wolves and hounds accompany the dead in saga and song. A dog might lead a soul across borderlands or sit as faithful at the station that the traveler is known and owed passage. Birds, ravens especially, operate as messengers and witnesses. Hugin and Munin bring news to Odin on the day-to-day, But birds, more generally, are eyes and heralds in a crossing. They do the job whether the Valkyrie rides or the boat burns. Their roles are practical, immediate, and often less dramatic than a polished dancer would prefer. And then there's fate, word or urluk, the slow, inexorable script against which all movement is read. Transit is frequently less a free choice than a working out of destiny. Psychopomps perform choreography that the world's lawbook has already assigned. Valkyries, ferrymen, bulls, and ravens enact routes often pre-inscribed by urluk. Their efficiency is as much about reading a list as it is about carrying it out. In other words, you may be escorted, but someone else probably decided you'd need escorting in the first place. The psychopompic agencies are therefore varied and complementary. Some are martial, Valkyries who prefer a form spear to a polite summon. Some are relational, dogs and kinspeople who shepherd a corpse to its mounts. Some are poetic, ravens and singers whose memory keeping ensures our name's persistence. Together, they form a transport network that is pragmatic. Choose the warrior for Odin. Burn the ship if custom requires. Leave grave goods if the route asks for them. Each action is a credential, and each credential changes the crossing's terms. Tone-wise, the system is brisk and wry, because it must be. The Valkyrie is efficient. The ferryman is less polite, and the ravens are entirely disinterested in ceremony. The result is a cultural choreography that treats a passage to the next world as a matter of procedures and relations. Poetic? Yes, but also stubbornly pragmatic. Do the rites, lay out the kit, accept that urluk has an opinion, and you will find your way across the Helvegger, with your name still audible in the songs of those who remain. So, in short, in the north, Psychopomps are not a single clerk, but a whole office. Riders who choose, ferrymen who ferry, animals who accompany, and fate that signs the orders. They move the dead along routes that are martial, relational, and finally, poetically appointed. All of them doing the job with the grim efficiency that long experience with ships, battle, and bridges tends to breed. Court and Inhabitants, Valhalla, Fólkvangr, Hell, Odin, Freyja, and the Silent Dead. The Norse afterworld is not a single file queue before one judge. It is a neighborhood with distinct houses, landlords, and different sorts of welcome. Some dead are requisitioned for glory and arms, some are received into a lady's hall, and most arrive beneath the earth into hell's cool, domestic rooms. Each court runs its own economy of honor, obligation, and expectation, and each requires the living to have done their paperwork in the form of pyres, shipgraves, or a properly sung name. Now, Valhalla is the headline, Odin's meat-stacked hall, where those chosen from the battlefield feast, sharpen, train, and rehearse an endless preparation for Ragnarök. It is honor kept as practice, in days of combat and nights of feast. The dead do not simply rest, they continue the work that made them notable in life. In Valhalla, the warrior's identity remains civic and active. Arms, reputation, and the company of fellow fighters are the currency. One imagines a very large dining table, hearty sense of camaraderie, and a kitchen staff that never runs out of boar. The Valhalla fantasy has a seductive edge, glorious eternal apprenticeship, and it requires the living to have recognized, provisioned, and, if need be, commemorated the warrior in the right ways so the Valkyries can find them worthy. Then Fólkvangr is Freyja's field, a complementary hall where half of those chosen by the Valkyries may be received. Freyja's role complicates any simple binary of masculine glory. She is a female lord of the slain, with her own prerogatives and a hall whose selection overlaps with Odin's. Valkyries and Freyja together form a system of selection that is both martial and relational. The presence of women as major afterlife lords means that selection into the halls is not merely a one-size-fits-all consolation prize. Freyja's domain carries its own honor, rights, and expectations, a reminder that status in death follows the social currencies that mattered in life. And then there's Hell, Helheim, or simply Hell, and her household as the earth beneath the earth. Hell herself presides over a cool, shattered house that accommodates those who die of sickness, old age, or misadventure rather than shows when battlefield ends. Hell's domain is not a place of moral retribution in the sense of eternal punishment. It is the quiet, ordered end of many lives. The dead here continue a social extension. Kinship ties, memory, and a network of obligations persist in a subtle register. Households are domestic rather than theatrical. They are households, orderings, and an economy of remembrance that expects the living to visit, name, and provision where appropriate. Across these halls, the dead continue their social roles. Warriors remain warriors in Valhalla. Elders and house leaders retain a kind of more-like status in Hell, where memory and oath matter. The afterlife is a continuation of social identity. Your ring, your obligations, and the stories told about you determine where you fit and how you are remembered. These and oaths connect the living and dead. Telling a tale at the hearth keeps a name and currency, and, in Norse thought, can be as potent as a sword in securing one's place in song and memory. Now, not every afterlife is genteel. Barrows and burial mounds are watched. Draugr, the revenant dead, animate with grievance and greed. Prowl mounds and shorelines, they are the dangerous counterpoint to the hospitable halls. Draugr, or treasure, swell with malice and can trouble the living if boundaries are trespassed or obligations ignored. Other monstrous denizens, watchful beasts, and uncanny guardians at some barrows and strand lines enforce the liminal etiquette. A place must be treated correctly, or someone is likely to leave with a missing goat and a new story to avoid. Thresholds are policed. The watchers at barrows, the ferryman at strand and ford, the Valkyrie and the turning of battle. All these agents ensure that passage obeys the codes. Sometimes the path is determined by Erluk or Hyrd in the inscrutable web of fate that sets a line one cannot entirely escape. At other times, Psychopomps are selective. Valkyries chose various, ferrymen rode those who have proper credentials. Ravens and hounds multiply the evidence that a name is known. The net result is an order that is at once ritual and juridical. Rights, goods, and social claims influence the destination. There is a modest skepticism woven through the reverence. The sagas and poems honor gods and homies, but they also remind the living of the labor such glory requires. The feast to be held, the goods to be buried, the songs to be sung. Glory carries an administrative cost. Provision the pyre, grease the runners for ship burial, sing the canon that registers a name. And for the majority who do not end up in whole law, hell's schoolrooms require different care. Remembered names, proper rites, and the quiet labor of kin. So, in sum, the Norse afterworld is pure and practical. Valhalla, Fólkvangr, preserve honor as continuing practice. Hell conserves social identity beneath the earth. Draugr and Mount Watchers guard the thresholds. And Psychopomps, Valkyries, ferrymen, hounds and birds carry the dead along routes that are at once faded and credentialed. Treat the rites with competence, and the household of the dead remembers you kindly. Neglect them, and you may find someone knocking at your mount with a very sharp grievance and an appetite for unsettled accounts. Judgment, reward, and cultural function, honor, fate, and the social afterlife. Judgment in the north is less a solemn audit by a lone magistrate, and more a public ledger kept by a very traditional neighborhood watch. Honor, fate, memory, and proper ceremony all have voting rights. The dead do not face a single moral scorecard. Instead, they enter a social economy where reward is recognition in life and memory terms. A place at a horse table, a named space and story, or the quiet settlement of rest beneath the earth. Fail to meet the community's expectations and the consequence is social noise. A restless mount, a Valkyrie's grievance, or a household whose reputation slowly unravels. At the heart of the system is honor, valor on the field, the reputation you carried, the poetry sung about you. These are credentials. Valkyries select the slain for holds, not by applied moral calculus, but according to an ethic of worth, courage, conduct, and those small public acts that in life marked someone as a person of standing. Entrance to Valhalla or Freyja's Fólkvangr is therefore a kind of social promotion. The whole continues, the people's social work as an ongoing practice of arms and race. The reward is communal. War on the spit, names and song, a company of peers, an afterlife that perpetuates the social identity that mattered in life. But honor does not float free of destiny. Vurt or Urluk, the binding skein of fate, gives the whole enterprise a rather stubborn inevitability. Many outcomes are read as the working out of a life already patterned by fate. Psychopomps and Valkyries enact routes that the net of Urluk has already tied. This is not fatalism as a comfort. It's a cultural grammar that explains why some are taken to the hold and others are led to hell. You can strive and your deeds shape reputation and selection. But there's also narrative insistence that certain lines are already written. Think of it as a combination of meritocracy and an old, infuriating family will that refuses to be amended. Ritual physiology is the practical backbone. Proper funeral rites, chosen grave goods, carefully sung kenning and naming speech are not mere sentiments. They are the paperwork that makes one legible to the roads, to the ferrymen, and to the household gods that read registers. A ship burial, a pyre well tended, a carved stone with the right name. These are credentials that clinch your place for the dead. Omit them, and the risk is not metaphysical torment but social disorder. The missing right can produce draugar, who resent their incomplete affairs, or a family cursed with bad luck because the ledger was left unpicked. The ancients were pragmatists. Do the ritual properly, and the afterlife is less likely to send you an invoice. Now, the social function is comprehensive. The afterworld enforces norms, hospitality, oath-keeping, kin care. By making their neglect visible in memory and consequence, those who fail to look after their kin's burial find that social memory is unkind. Names fade, ancestral prestige diminishes, and the practical benefits that flow from remembered deeds, protection, alliances, legal standing, evaporates. Conversely, families who maintain obligation accrue social capital. A well-remembered ancestor bolsters claims, legitimizes leadership, and keeps oath credible across generations. In short, ritual upkeep equals political currency. Consequence here is reparative and communal rather than eternally punitive. The problem is not moral condemnation locked in a vault, but a social and environmental ripple. Neglected rites lead to revenants and local instability. Repaired rituals restore balance and reintegrate the dead as productive members of the social order. Communities are therefore practiced and ritual repair. Apology rites, reburials, public feasts, and the re-performance of names and songs are all ways to correct the ledger. The mechanism is simple and robust. Perform the remedy, observe the change, and update the communal files. It is governance by effect, rather than proclamation. There is also more theater in the stories people tell. Saga and song dramatize models. The heroic ideal, bold, generous, oath-bound, and the domestic piety of those who keep hearth and kin. These are not abstract moralities. They are templates for civic behavior. Young people learn by example which deeds secure whole places and which household attentions protect a family's memory. The myths thus function as a curriculum. Be brave, be also honorable at home. Remember your dead, but do not neglect your living. So, finally, there's the system's practical modesty. Consequences seldom require divine fireworks. They arrive as social disorder, as a man's instability, or as a household's diminished standing. Repairs public and performative. A feast, a reburial, a carved round stone. And when done, the world resets. The Norse afterlife, then, is less a ledger of metaphysical punishment, and more an ethic of social accounting. Honor buys you whole places. Fate frames the options, ritual secures the credentials, and communal repair fixes the mistakes. It is austere, civic, and oddly sensible, which is to say, Norse. So, deeds are durable because people sing about them. Rites make passage legible because people perform them. And memory is the currency that binds the living to the dead. Do the work, sing the name, carve the stone, or expect a very indignant draugar to attend your next family gathering with multiple complaints. The Norse world keeps things brisk. A pyre or a ship starts the road. Valkyries to the choosing, and the dead continue as social beings. Feasting, watching, or lurking, where the living pay debts and song, feast, and carved stone. So keep the rights tidy, the Tauga do not appreciate sloppy bookkeeping.